Right. Good morning, John.
Morning, Irina.
So we've got today with us, as I already introduced, John. So those of you who do not know who John Worne is, he is the Chief Executive of the Chartered Institute of Linguists. And this is the UK's Royal Charter Body for languages and linguists. So we're really, really privileged to have John with us today. And as I already mentioned to the audience with us, we're going to cover a number of points today. So how the Chartered Institute of Linguists is adapting to change, what's the bright about the future for language professionals, advances in AI, and more. So we're hoping to cover as many questions as possible today and pick on John's brain. Are you ready?
Go for it.
So, John, in preparation for today's interview, I've obviously checked you out on the internet, and I was absolutely amazed just how much you've done in this life and how much experience you've got, and that's kind of like really excited me. And just for those who haven't heard that yet, John has worked in different countries and cultures around the world. He's got experience as a director in cabinet office. He worked in countries such as Russia and Colombia and throughout Southeast Asia and so on. He worked as the director of strategy at the British Council. So this is a tremendous experience that we're hoping to tap in today. So, John, where did your passion for languages begin?
Well, I would say that would be in Colombia, actually. I have to say that I wasn't a great student of languages when I was at school. It wasn't really something that was encouraged. I went to a normal state school in the UK, and we were French. They had an attempt to teach us French, but we weren't really listening. In fairness, so it came to me really in a working context. So I spent several months in Colombia interviewing people in terms of understanding how the country worked and what the potential was for the company that I worked for. And I did that with a colleague of mine from our consortium partners over there. And, just basically spending your whole time immersed in the Spanish language, I started to pick it up and started to understand more and more. And for the first time in my life, it was obvious that it was really useful. I think sometimes when you're sitting in a classroom a long way away from another country, sometimes people struggle to understand how it's going to be useful to them. But of course, if you have an experience of going overseas and in particular working or living overseas, it just becomes incredibly obvious how valuable languages are. And I think the other thing that you realize is that everyone kind of is good at languages. We're all naturally good at languages. You just have to be in the environment where
Are we?
that opportunity is made available to you. So I think sometimes we scare people off from languages when in actual fact it's the most natural skill that human beings have. So I think we just need to help more people to feel confident and develop that skill. I would say, incidentally, that one of the big problems that we have now in the UK is post-Brexit, it's incredibly hard to do school visits. It's also incredibly hard for universities to do exchanges. And of course, this is really disastrous because very often what people need early on in their lives is an experience of going overseas and just hearing another language and seeing other people, working and living in a different kind of a way. So I think that's a real tragedy that we're not making that more available to people at school, because that's the golden moment really when you can get people interested.
Absolutely, John. But Spanish is not the only language you speak. You spent 5 years in France.
Yeah, I speak okay French with a bit of an accent and a bit slangy as well, because I learned it in a company context. So when I then had to speak French in a sort of more professional context of the British Council, particularly once at the British Embassy, I had to smarten up my language because I was very much language of the banlieue. But yes, I speak perfectly good.
Any other languages under your belt?
Okay, Italian. So my Italian's probably around about B1, maybe, with hope to get it up to B2, and that's all been learnt exclusively via Duolingo and Memrise. So
And you mentioned
we have,
B1, B2. Do you want to elaborate for those who might not know what that
yeah.
means?
So a useful thing, I think, and a really important thing to enable people with languages is to recognize that there are different levels of language that we can all achieve. And I think very often people think that the only useful level of language is fluency, but of course all levels of language are useful. And the Common European Framework of Reference, which is the one that we tend to use the most, gives you a grading according to your speaking, writing, listening, and there's one I've missed there, skills. And basically, what it's a slightly confusing scale, I think, because A is the bottom, B is the middle, and C is the top. And then within the scales, it's broken down into 1 and 2, 2 being better than 1. So if you're absolute beginner, you're A1. If you've got, some words, you're A2. If you're at the point where you can have a basic conversation and understand quite a lot, you'll be B1. B2 is really useful level of languages. So probably, many people will be able to get by quite well with B2 languages. Everyone on this call will probably be C1 at least. C1 would be, what you would expect for a professional linguist. And then absolute top of the shop is C2, which is, where you would be getting towards indistinguishable from a native speaker.
I've actually done Cambridge Syndicate exams, UCLES, and in that kind of grading, we've had three top levels: first certificate, advanced, and proficiency. Proficiency, the one that I've reached to, was C2. So
I would say, based on having listened to a lot of people and listened to lots of assessments, I would think you would be a C2, Irina. So congratulations.
I've been examined.
Whereas my French is probably, B2, C1 borderline, depending on what you talk to me about.
Fantastic.
So, it will vary a bit. And my written French will be, very, very low down the scale.
And is it correct, John? I'm sorry interrupting because there's so much to cover, but is it correct that we would really like to see somewhere around B1, B2 for public service interpreters to be at a higher spectrum of the language skills here?
Well, I would say that you would certainly, I think, for complex cases, for something that is, challenging, contested, and important, you would want people with C1 skills, definitely. I think one of the interesting things, and we'll perhaps get into this in the Q&A, is whether B2 skills are good enough for less challenging contexts. And this is something that, people will have strong opinions on, but certainly I think that someone with B2 skills would potentially be a liability in a court, but someone with B2 skills would probably be quite helpful if you were helping someone to navigate local authority services, so long as they were very accessible local authority services, not contested ones.
And what do you mean by liability in court if we've got a lower level of language?
I think all that these scales really tell you is the frequency and nature of errors. So basically, they're all working around how many mistakes and errors that you make. And I think it's the stakes that are associated with an error, and also, as everyone on this call will likely know, the pressure that you're under. So when you're under performance pressure, most people start to do less well in terms of their spoken languages. So the combination of the performance pressure, the stress, and then your linguistic level is going to determine how well you're supporting someone in in an environment. So if it's a high stress, high complexity environment, and you've got some gaps in your vocabulary and linguistic skills, then you're going to struggle. So I think this is the real test. And what I would also say is that I think it's really, really important for us all to talk more about linguistic levels, because qualifications are not necessarily a good guide to linguistic level. So you will have people with language degrees who may have spoken language at B2. You'll have people who have, and I mean, I think it would be difficult to get a language degree and not be B2, but there'll be plenty of people who have language degrees who are not C1. Plenty of people. So the point is that the high degree of skill in spoken language, or in any of the four, skills, reading, writing, speaking, and listening, the qualifications that we offer in this country don't always map onto those skill levels. So that's why I think it is important to talk about the Common European Framework of Reference, because that gives you a surer guide into someone's some actual skill levels. And certainly, I think if you think about the work that we have done with Ministry of Defence or with the Foreign Office, they would absolutely use these linguistic level scales because they're a much, much better guide than whether someone's got a degree or a
I
master's.
cannot believe, John, just how much we've covered under one question.
Yeah, go for it. Well,
Where
ask me
did your
another.
passion for languages begin? That was amazing. Okay, I really would like to go on a little bit because we've got so many meaty questions there. But you worked for international businesses, Cabinet Office, Department of Health, British Council, King's College, Royal College of Art. What roles did you find the most challenging, and what more were the most enjoyable?
Well, I think the challenge is, and this is perhaps something that we'll want to talk about some more. I think the main challenge is moving between sectors. So when I moved from the private sector, from international businesses to central government, I could not believe how different it was. All of the skills that I had, all of the things that I could do, all of the things that were valued in the private sector absolutely weren't valued in government. So I had to completely relearn how to operate at work. Totally different skill set. I'll give you an example. Many people will be familiar with the acronym ASAP, as soon as possible. So in the private sector, everything was ASAP. When I arrived in government, I said ASAP, and somebody looked at me and said, "That's not what we're about here."
Oh.
And they said the correct acronym here is IDC.
What's that?
In due course. So I think.
And when is in due course then?
In due course, which means
when is it? When is it? Is it just any time?
In due course is when it's the right time. So rather than as soon as possible. So I think this sort of it's just one example. I could give you thousands more. But the difference between the way things are valued and the way things are judged and considered and the way work gets done in the two environments, I found mind blowing. And then, when I went to work for a university, again, totally different set of cultural values, so totally different vocabulary, totally different things that are valued and are important. So what I would say is that any sector, and I've worked, in companies, government, not-for-profits, charities, international organizations, I've pretty much done the main sectors of the economy. They are all so different from each other in terms of what matters and what people care about and what the main drivers are, that if you ever want to do anything that gets stakeholders together across different sectors, it's really quite tricky unless you understand the things that are motivating and driving those particular sectors.
What led you to the COL, and why COL?
So CIOL, that was really about languages. That if I was to take the bit of my jobs that I'd enjoyed the most, it was probably the international bits. It was the bits to do with working in other cultures, and it was also learning languages. So without blowing my own horn here, I am in the top 1% of Duolingo learners and have an uninterrupted 1,300 and something day streak. So when I'm left to my own devices, and when the kids, family, and work leaves me alone, the first thing I do is learn languages. So I practice my French every day, practice my Italian every day. I'm currently learning Japanese. I've done a little bit of I found Esperanto really interesting. because Esperanto sort of gives you, Esperanto is a meta language. It sort of explains the whole Indo-European family. I've also done courses in linguistics. So, I think that's what I do when I'm, on my own free time. So it's always nice to work in a job which connects to the thing that you would do if you weren't in a job. I look forward to my retirement in not too many years, and plan to spend more time doing languages.
So would it be fair to say what led you to CRL is the fact that you were able to combine all your experience and the most enjoyable part of this experience in that role?
Yes, exactly that, yeah.
And having worked in several government roles at the Cabinet Office and the Department of Health, what do you feel the government's view is on language professionals? Do they hold them in high regard, or do they think that anyone speaking a couple of languages can do the job?
Well, the first thing to say is that there is no such thing as government. So one of the things that you realize when you go and work in it is that it's just a vast organization with lots and lots of different parts to it. And just on the civil service side, in terms of central government departments, you'd be talking 250,000 people. So it's big is the first thing. And very often we say, well, government doesn't like, or government does like, or government doesn't want to, or government does want to. Some of that is to do with with the policies that government has, which will relate to a different political administration. But a lot of it's just down to individuals and individuals and how they work. And you have individuals who are very motivated to take something on. So if you're lucky when you're working with government, you find someone who's very committed to public service and wants to improve things. And then if you're unlucky when you're working with government, you might find someone who's a bit of a blocker, or doesn't really want to take any risk, or doesn't really want to do very much. And then if they're responsible for the area that you're trying to improve, then it's quite difficult to get things moving. The other thing is that to get anything done with government, you have to normally align several different parts of government. So the job in the Cabinet Office is about aligning several different parts of government to get all the bits of government that need to do something to work together. Now, anyone who's watching the current COVID inquiry, will see just how difficult that is, given that you're going to be working with 10 Downing Street, you're going to be working with politicians, and you're going to be working with government departments who, all have their own different objectives and desires. And then the final piece of the jigsaw with government is simple way to understand, what drives a lot of it is money. At the end of the day, there is not enough money to do all the things that everybody wants to do. So all government departments are in effect competing with each other for resources. They're competing with each other for money and for staff. And although they do that in quite a sophisticated and genteel way, at the end of the day, they're all arguing for money, and they don't generally share money easily on issues that cut across departments. So how does that all come together for us? Well, it's the product of what a handful of people in the Ministry of Justice, a handful of people in the Department for Education, a handful of people in the Foreign Office, a handful of people in the Department of Health. It's the product of that handful of people with the massive overlay of the priorities of the government of the day, and then the even more massive overlay of the state of the UK economy. And if you want to sort of work out where government is likely to be on something, you just kind of take those factors and you can sort of work it out. So there's no money, there are many other priorities, and this government's not very popular. So that sort of gives you the context for people who are working in government.
But based on what you've just said, John, what is the government? Government is individuals, is that right? So sometimes we hear from practitioners, especially those who've been in the industry for quite some time, they've seen how the profession evolved, the challenges, the hardship. And sometimes you hear practitioners saying, oh, we've done this. That's already been done. You're not creating anything new, with new collaboration that we're doing and SPI4J and so on. And would it be fair to say that even though certain things already been done, it's never it doesn't hurt to do it again, because simply maybe the time was wrong,
Oh,
the people were not right,
absolutely,
there was a
Irina. I mean,
blocker somewhere in the government, and now maybe the right opportunity, the right people just happen to be speaking to us, and we might actually get somewhere. Is that right?
exactly right. So the key thing with government is that there are times, it's about getting the planets into alignment. There are times when, it's just really, really difficult to get something done because people are in the wrong places, or people have got different pressures, or you're not in the right timing for a contract, renewal or something like that. So there are times when it's difficult, but the golden rule is that you create the right circumstances so that when the opportunity arises, you can push it through.
I
And
so
that, I
totally
think, is
agree.
the reason to have a constant dialogue with government, constantly be working to find the people who are proactive and want to make things
And
happen,
hoping for that window of opportunity.
and then helping
Just
them
be there at the
to,
right time.
because there's lots of people in working government. I mean, when I worked in government, I wanted to make things better. That's why I did the job. I thought, there's an opportunity to make people more healthy, or here's an opportunity. I worked on counterterrorism. Here's an opportunity to keep people safe. There aren't that many people who work in government, who are deliberately trying to make life worse for people. Most people do it because they have a strong sense of public service
So there
values.
are passionate people,
You've just got to find
you
them.
can see behind me. Let's leave the passion. So there are passionate people everywhere.
Exactly.
It's just a matter of finding them.
And Irina, you've been on calls with our government comrades, haven't you? And you can see that some of them are very, very motivated. And even
Yes,
better, if you're dealing with people who represent public services, because there's an important difference between government. Government is always going to be a bit more careful and cagey, and public services. So you take someone like Mark Lewis, for example, for the police.
it's been
You'll never
recorded.
find. Say again.
We're recording.
Yes, it's all going to be positive. Don't worry. You take someone like Mark from the police, and he takes ownership of problems. He wants to make things better. Of course, he's got constraints, because he's got the same constraints everyone's got: limited finances, contracts that are already in place, things that he can't do, things that his bosses won't let him do. But you have
Yes,
a highly motivated, capable, knowledgeable individual who I would say has made a big difference. Now, has he done
absolutely.
everything? Has he done everything that we all want? No, of course he hasn't. But it's not because he doesn't want to. It's because
There are
there are
challenges.
limitations. So I think this is the reason to keep persevering. Every now and then you get a Mark Lewis appears and can make a real difference. We've had good people helping us at the Ministry of Justice. It's gone a bit quiet recently, so we need to liven things up again. But we've had some real forward motion in the last couple of years with them, and we now have an engaged dialogue with them. When I started at the CIOL, there wasn't much dialogue with the Ministry of Justice, and if you've got no dialogue, then you don't know who you need to be talking to, and you don't know how to influence them. Now we've got a dialogue.
Yes, I
So I
agree.
would
And I
agree.
agree on your observation about Mark Lewis and
Mm,
people like Mark Lewis, like yourself, like Mike Karloff. I do believe in the role of individuals in history, because they're the individuals that make a change. And it seems like leaders normally, like Marmite, they either hated or they're loved. And you probably find loads of haters of Mike Karloff and Mark Lewis, but they are people like yourself, that people who are making the change. They're driving the industry into a better regulated place and safer place for interpreters and for end users. But I
yeah, I
wanted
mean,
to
I
just,
think, as
yeah,
we would both agree, Mike Orlov's absolutely terrific, isn't he? In terms of vision, drive, energy, commitment. You can't fault Mike in terms of what he's brought to things. So I agree with you. I think individuals make a difference, but I also think that it helps to understand what the drivers are, because everybody in life is trying to do is trying to do the right thing. Really, I don't think there are many people who get out of bed in the morning trying to make life worse for other people. It's just you've got different drivers and priorities.
yeah. Agree to disagree. But going back to, we've covered a little bit,
Mhm.
kind of in general, the language skills, but now kind of going into a bit more of the industry goals and purposes.
Yeah.
What do you feel, what level of qualification, and I'm now going into not just language
Yeah.
skills, but a level of qualifications do you feel interpreters should have? And I'm talking about public service interpreters specifically.
Yeah, I think we would take the view that the best qualification for people to have will be the DPSI. So DPSI is a level 6 qualification. That means it's broadly speaking equivalent to degree level, but the crucial element in the DPSI is that it's C1 plus level of spoken language ability. And it kind of goes back to the experience that I had working around the world. I mean, we said we wouldn't talk about Russia, but let's just have 30 seconds on Russia. When I worked in Russia, I mean, the standard of interpreters was just amazing. Like off the spectrum in terms of linguistic ability. Working in China, a bit more scratchy sometimes, the quality of translation, and much more tended to get lost in meetings. And then working in Europe, very often we wouldn't have interpreters because it was assumed that everyone would get by on English. Tragically, the monoglot English people would only speak English, and we'd expect our European partners to speak English to us. So in those sorts of experiences, you can kind of see the difference in terms of what's going to happen for a person, in terms of the support they're going to get. If you have the standard of interpreters that you would commonly find in Central and Eastern Europe, then people are going to get outstanding support. If you have people with lower levels of linguistic skill, or people with effectively bilingualism but not necessarily the proven level up to C1, there are going to be more mistakes. And the cost of mistakes, I suppose, if I'm talking to a market trader for a local authority, asking them a question about trading standards, then the risk of mistakes is perhaps tolerable. If I'm in a court case, in an assault case, or an aggravated burglary or something, the risk of asking the question wrongly, or misunderstanding, or misinterpreting, is much greater. So in the ideal world, I think we'd want everyone to be a level 6 DPSI interpreter in every context. I think the issue is when we go back to resources and just the practical reality of how many linguists there are, and how they physically get to the places that they need to get to. I think it may not be realistic to expect everyone doing local authority work to have a full-blown level 6 DPSI. I think the interesting one, and this is where Mike has been very active, Mike Orlov, and where I think we're all increasingly worried, is the NHS, because the NHS is a bit of a crossover case. The NHS, there can be NHS contexts where the conversation is relatively benign and simple, where someone with bilingual skills or someone with community interpreting skills may be okay. But as we also know, consultation can become much more complicated very quickly, depending on what the diagnosis is or the circumstances are. And those are the situations where you'd want someone with level 6 skills with a DPSI. So I think what we're trying to do at the moment is shine a light on the risks in the NHS. And certainly, it isn't appropriate that people should be forced to use family members and people with, no proven qualifications whatsoever. So I think the interesting question for me is around the level 3 qualifications. We don't have that much of a stake in it as CIOL because we don't offer level 3 qualifications for interpreting. I think it's an interesting question. Are there contexts and circumstances where they are adequate? I probably tend towards the view that there may be some contexts and circumstances where level 3 community interpreting qualifications can be acceptable. So I would tend to be open to that. And I think the reason that I think we might want all to be open to it is the pipeline, because how do we create a pipeline of people with the skills? And what you can see, and you'll see this in a report that we put out with a number of other people, including yourselves, a couple of weeks ago in the Working Together report that we did with ATC, I think there's really good evidence that the number of people, fully qualified, DPSI qualified interpreters is reducing. So unless we do something to create a flow through and create a career path, then we're going to have a problem. So long answer to a short question. In the ideal world, everyone would have a level 6 DPSI. Absolutely level 6 DPSI for legal contexts and and I'd like to see it more in health contexts. Open question on level 3, and I think the crucial point is that level 3 for me we almost need to scrap the vocabulary level 3 and instead go back to the CEFR that I was saying earlier. I think you would need to and would want to see at least B2 and probably higher level B2 verbal skills in anyone who's doing any kind of interpreting job.
Yes, I totally agree with you. And interesting point you made about the NHS being that crossover. And is there anyone, it's not a question, it's just me kind of brainstorming that with you is what are the risks? Because as you quite rightly pointed out, the situation that seemingly looked at the time of assigning interpreter quite straightforward can escalate to life-threatening situation where all of a sudden you would need somebody much more qualified to tackle the challenges, and then you don't have that person on site. So I agree with you that kind of like that level 3 it is an open question here. It is that, especially in medical setting or police setting or legal setting, can there be somehow negotiated those risks with that person being on site and putting somebody at risk of not having a qualified person and therefore putting people at risk. But going back
just on that point, just to give you an illustration from another context, because sometimes it helps to see another context. There's a really interesting piece of work that is being done in the European Union at the moment about support to migrants. So in particular, migrants who might arrive in Lesbos or might arrive in Sicily, and how you get support to them. Now, at the moment, it's almost impossible to provide interpreter support to those people. What happens is you get very, very short notice. Basically the people at the reception areas find out what languages people inbound have got, with about half an hour's notice at best. And it's impossible to get interpreters on site in all circumstances. So the interesting thing that the EU are looking at is, how could they do that? Could some of that be done remotely? And how could they provide better support to people arriving in the most difficult circumstances? And, the interesting thing, it's not settled yet, but the interesting thing that I discovered in a call with them is that they are going for B2. So they're saying that they will absolutely accept B2 level languages for that sort of work. And when I said, wow, I'm slightly surprised by that, in the UK we would tend towards C1, they basically said, look, it's just not going to happen if we say C1. We'll never get the people, and the opportunity cost is that people will arrive and get no support whatsoever.
And can I just ask you, John, when they're saying they will never get people, is it because those professionals with C2 or C1 simply won't take that job because it's not well paid?
And there aren't enough of them yet.
Okay.
So it's there are not enough people with those skills in the languages, and they are really struggling to
Why would they not consider saying raising the fees for those and attract C2, C1 to that setting?
So what would you think might be the likely answer to that, given what I said to you about how governments make their decisions?
Okay, we'll just pause there.
Well,
we'll go to the next question.
Resource allocation, isn't it? So at the end of the day, there is no money. So the EU's got the same problem that we have. And when you look at EU countries, in many cases, their economies are behind ours. So they've got even less money. So of course you can move something up the priority list, But in order to move something up the priority list, you have to move something else down the priority list. And, that's the bit that's difficult in government, that there are lots and lots of things that we all want moved up the priority list, but very few things that people, will say, yeah, okay, well, let's cut corners on that, or let's not do that.
John,
So,
just before we're going into next question that I'm really keen to ask you, I just want to rewind slightly. You've mentioned DPSI and level 6, but there was also a qualification which I took, used to be called Metropolitan Police Test. Later on, it changed the name to DPI.
yeah.
And I know that DPSI, so that was qualification I took, although I did DPSI as well. But DPSI, you've got health and you've got law path. But DPSI, so leaving health path aside, because we're comparing in my question DPSI, law path, and DPI. DPSI was missing that crucial module, which was statement taking, which was DPI actually did have, and that was the reason why I went for Metropolitan Police Test, because I knew from the start that this is the setting, this is the domain I'm going to be going into. So that's why I've chosen. But I know you've scrapped the DPI. So will DPSI cover the statement taking part?
No, not specifically. And we talked to Mark Lewis and others about this. Practice has evolved in terms of the way that police work is, and they didn't feel that it was necessary to have a module that was that specific. So at the end of the day, the issue for those of us who provide qualifications is that every additional language and every additional variation that we make requires more papers to be set, and requires creates more risk, because if you don't get very many candidates for a particular variant, i.e. language or pathway, then the costs of the paper setting are never recovered.
All comes down to money.
Well, it's a trade-off between mission and money, isn't it? Our mission is to make sure that there are people with the right qualifications who can do the job. But if we can't afford to do it, then it would be a disaster if we pulled out of the DPSI altogether. The whole tent would collapse. So what we have to do is make some difficult trade-offs about what is sustainable and what isn't. What I would say, and I've had this conversation with other people who are on the call, is that the absolutely crucial thing is to establish someone's broad linguistic level. And there's a thing about vocabulary and repair. So basically, if you, for example, Irina, if you found a piece of vocabulary in English which you didn't know, it would not be very difficult for you to integrate that into your vocabulary set. You hear it once, you've probably got it. Also, if you found yourself with a piece of vocabulary that you were unsure about, given your command of English, you would very readily work around it and very quickly find out what that piece of vocabulary, that missing piece of vocabulary is. So you have the skills to work around linguistic complexity. And that's what comes at the higher levels. That's what's differentiating about C1 and C2. It's not just the vocabulary you have, it's also the meta understanding of how the language works, which means if you encounter something new, you can work around it. So I would have that in French, for example. You could throw a word that has appeared in the last 20 years, might be related to the dot-com boom or something like that. And although I didn't experience it when I was there, it would take me very little time to acquire it and understand it. So I think
the Cambridge Syndicate, they usually that skill would be assessed as use of English. That's just a variety of synonyms in the context. You know, you need to understand not only a variety of different terms that would mean exactly the same thing and how to operate in specific contexts, but also knowing them and how they actually fit in with various contexts.
Yeah. So I think we're saying the same thing. So if you're basically doing a DPSI law paper where you're talking about, I don't know, possession, you're talking about cannabis, you're talking about, you know, using some slang terms, and you're also using some more formal terms which you might encounter in the courtroom, we set the paper so there's a reasonable chance of spotting if you've got significant gaps. So basically, have you got adequate fluency? Have you got adequate speed? And then are there some gaps in your vocabulary which are likely to be problematic? You could argue that, you know, the perfect test would be to test you on, you know, all legal terminology that exists. You know, we could get the statute book out and we could, you know, I could go through from A to Z and I could ask you all of the words. But, you know, I don't think that would be a reasonable test. I think the reasonable test is, have you got C1 plus verbal abilities? Can you simultaneously and consecutively translate? And have you got representative vocabulary that, you know, is representative of what you will be exposed to in the legal setting? And then bear in mind that no one can go straight into a courtroom with just a DPSI. You've also got to put in the, you know, the hundreds of hours of experience. So you're going to pick up the, you know, any missing pieces of vocabulary there. What I would say though is that, you know, even if someone's learned lots of vocabulary, if they haven't got the linguistic skill level, you know, book learnt vocabulary won't be good enough for them. So I think the point of the DPSI is to test that you've got the speed and the accuracy, not to be a, you know, vocabulary test, if you like.
Absolutely. And as you get the qualification, we normally move from the vocabulary to terminology and glossary building. But you mentioned mission. And so what is the CRL mission statement? And what is CRL's goal?
Well, we say we're for languages and linguists. So basically, go back to 1910 and the Royal Charter, then, you know, the purpose of the organization is to provide support to linguists in all contexts and all environments, and give them the means to be successful, to have qualifications and recognition, and to basically support universal understanding and a more positive world. So that's the original high-level mission. Obviously, a really, really significant and important part of that is supporting and enabling people with the highest level of linguistic skill. So that would obviously be translators and interpreters first and foremost, but also diplomats, people who work in the armed forces, and people who work in business. And then let's not forget educationalists, because without educationalists, you won't generate the pipeline. So we have all of those in our membership. I would say that, you know, absolutely at the center of the organization is translation and interpreting, but we also provide support to people who work in universities, teachers, and people who work in business professions and government.
So is your goal to support them, or what is your goal?
Our goal is to support all of those people, so support learning. And I mean, the best world for the Chartered Institute of Linguists would be the whole world having multilingualism.
Fantastic. And what is your role, John, in all of this? And what does it involve?
Well, what does it involve? I mean, it involves probably very much like yours, Irina, a bit of everything, really. You know, making sure that everything works, making sure that we're represented in all of the stakeholder forums that we need to do. We produce publications and work with other people to produce publications which we hope will shape the landscape. We argue for translators and interpreters, and obviously we provide qualifications. So just a little example. The last month, yesterday we put a paper out on artificial intelligence and how that's going to affect the world of translation and language services. So that was quite a big piece of work with our council members. and outside experts to describe what AI is bringing to us. A couple of weeks ago, we did Working Together, which was working with everyone who's in Professional Interpreters for Justice, yourself, Irina, obviously, and then the ATC, to set out 10 things that we think need to be improved to support the future for public service interpreting. But then, we also have a relationship with Duolingo, for example. So we, promoted Duolingo's 2023 language survey. And, one piece of good news in that was that 3 million people are learning Welsh on Duolingo. So I spoke to, our colleagues in Wales and, pointed that out to them. And, they gave us a supportive quote saying, no better place to polish up your Welsh than on Duolingo. So, I think it's making sure we're doing something for everybody, really. And, the only way that we get loads of people to have very, very high levels of languages is to support lots and lots of different pathways to that. Some people will have them because of the family circumstances they grow up in. Some of them will have them through the work they do or by moving countries. Some of them will have them through the education system. I think we've got to try and, find ways to support more people to have excellent languages.
In that kind of mission and the goal of your great organization, what would be your expectation from all the stakeholders? And you mentioned stakeholders earlier in our discussion. So what would be your expectation from, say, from interpreters, from the government, from other stakeholders?
Expectation. Well, I think you would start with some mutual respect and an understanding, wouldn't you? I think that's probably the thing that we would want all stakeholders to have. And I think that's what we try to bring whenever we're involved in a meeting or a group. Can we have some mutual respect and understanding? Because if you want to make things better, that's really where you need to start from. So I think if you were to stereotype it, you would probably want people in government, and as we've said, there is no such thing as government. There's just lots and lots of government departments and people and priorities. But if you were to stereotype it, it would be great if people in government had a better understanding of language levels, a better understanding of the value of languages, and a better understanding of the risks that they take if they do things without the support of language professionals. So that's what we work for there, a better understanding and appreciation. I think, when we talk to other stakeholders, I suppose what I would say is it helps to have some appreciation and understanding of the pressures that other people have. So, what we try to do is kind of create positive coalitions of the willing, if you like, where everybody accepts they may not be able to get everything that they want, but if we work together, we can all get some of what we want. But if we just chuck rocks at each other, then we won't get very much at all. So I'm not saying that occasional chucking of rocks isn't a good idea. I think it does, to get attention, you do sometimes have to bounce a stone off somebody's head, don't you? But, I think if you don't have a plan for what you're going to follow up with, just chucking rocks doesn't really get you very far. It just, causes people to either chuck some rocks back at you or, go and hide away.
Absolutely agree with you. I'm also a qualified professional supervisor. So supporting supervisees is not always to validate. Obviously, validating is great, but challenging the practices is also, and that's what you meant by the stone. You can't always be in agreement. You need to challenge, and through the challenge, we normally improve, and that's how we move forward. So totally agree with you on that. And the positivity and cooperation and collaboration, and also the fact that what we're all doing mutually and together, that togetherness is raising awareness. And raising awareness is not one-way system. It's not just for Ministry of Justice, it's not just for NHS, but also for practitioners. We're finding that practitioners sometimes also not quite, if I can use that term, on the ball of what's going on, and they need to absolutely be updated on what's happening. So together, I think we're doing that, you know, raising awareness is just ongoing process. We can never stop because there's always a challenge, there's always a change, and we need to keep on top of that. And I know you've mentioned that who are the COL members, but maybe you just briefly cover again, because I thought it was quite fascinating that the members of COL, you've got such a wide range of membership there. So who are the COL members?
Yeah, so the majority of our members will be professional translators. Second biggest group, professional interpreters, more or less equal to people who work in education in universities in the main. And then we have a smaller group of people who who work in a business context or in government contexts. So diplomats, people who worked in the armed services, etc. So that's the basic composition, and then we are, I think from memory, it's about 2/3 to 3/4 are physically based in the UK, and about 1/4 to 1/3 are physically based internationally, and we have members all around the world. So quite a big membership in Hong Kong, China, also obviously in Europe. But we have strong ties with the Americas as well. So we have council members who are also based around the world, which is, you know, quite complicated for governance meetings because we have to take into account time zones. But yeah, we're now getting participation in our governance from international delegates, which is really great.
Incredibly rich membership.
Yeah, it's a
Absolutely
really
incredible.
varied group of people, and you know, we did a nice session last week with the ATC actually on certified translation around the world, and you know, that drew in a really interesting and diverse audience. You know, and it was really interesting to hear the differences in other countries. You know, to hear about how certified translation works in Argentina, in, you know, United Arab Emirates, in obviously in European countries. So I think it gives us a bit of context and perspective as well to have the international membership.
But obviously, in the context of Association of Interpreters and Translators, as you can hear from the actual name and the title, the focus for us is interpreters and translators. So what would be the benefits of being a member of COL if you are, or for interpreters and translators if you are in that industry, specifically in that industry?
Well, I mean, the big one is find a linguist or find a translator / find an interpreter. So, yeah, I think that would be the thing that you know, people will get work from being in our listings. Obviously, we have you know, webinars and training that we offer to people. We have our conference, and we have various other member benefits. But you know, what I've tried to do, and it's you know, it's a bit of a risk, this is try to make more of our resources available freely, and to, you know, not put members only all over everything. So I guess, you know, what we're kind of depending on as well is a sense of being part of something. So you know, this is not a purely transactional thing that I pay my membership fee in exchange for, you know, a list of benefits which are equal to the value of the membership fee. It's perhaps more about being part of a community that if we don't all, you know, work together, then ultimately the community will start to deteriorate and fall apart. So I think part of what we need to, and I'm sure this is the case for you as well, part of what I think we need to say to people is, if you don't support organizations like us, then, you know, we'll not be here to support you.